everyone, it's Jason, and I'm here with the Content Marketing Virtual Summit. And today, right now, the speaker coming up is Mike Jones. Mike Jones is, first of all, he is on the call with us, and he is the founder of building remarkable B2B brands. And actually, his company is called Resound, okay, R-E-S-U-O-U-N-D, Resound. And I really like his talk. I really like what he's going to share with you guys. I want you to really pay attention to this and write notes and think about how you're going to use what Mike is sharing and teaching with you today. And one of the things that Mike really is going to highlight in his talk is this core principle. And the core principle is you are remarkable. And so the critical thing here is, how do you stand out? How do you create something that's really authentic, something that you are going to be known for as being best in the world, something that you love? Now, Mike's background, which is really an interesting background, is he has a background in history. So he's kind of really somebody who looks at things and thinks about the arc, the story arc. How does something move forward in history? How do things happen? How do events happen? Why are certain events more known and talked about than others? And the last thing I'm going to say before we get into Mike's talk, and I'm so happy that he's going to be sharing this with us and with you guys, is that his role is to really help create strategic brand solutions and also to execute on that solution, right? So it's not just theory. He's going to, in his agency, he actually executes on that. And every single thing has to be done to create that feeling that when someone interacts with your brand, they're going to remember you. They're going to want to talk about you. They're going to want to know why. They're going to know why you're different. So that was a short introduction, but I am really happy to have Mike here. And just so everyone knows this, again, Mike Jones, founder of Resound. You are remarkable. I'm going to hand it over to Mike. He's going to do the talk. And at the end, I'll come back and say a few words. So Mike, thanks so much for being here, man. And so excited to hear your talk today.
Yeah, Jay, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and get to share this awesome presentation. And it's not the presentation that's awesome. I think it's what's in the presentation that's so great. And I'm really excited to share that with all of you, right, who are listening. So again, the title of the talk is You Are Remarkable. And we're going to talk about how to unlock your authentic brand story to make your marketing compelling, right? How to make it interesting, how to really drive value in it so that people go, yes, I want what you are talking about. We'll get more into that as we go here. But I want to start with a little exercise for you. I want you to imagine something. I want you to imagine something funky. Okay, imagine something funky. And I'll give you about 10 seconds to think of something funky. Ready? You thinking? Got some ideas? Maybe something's coming into your head? All right. All right. So what is it that you thought was funky, right? Maybe write that down. Maybe say it out loud if that's helpful, just to be able to remember what you thought was funky. Because in a second here, I'm going to ask you a really important question about that. Who defined funky? Did you define funky? Did I define funky? Who defined funky in this exercise? Well, I asked you to think of something funky. And so you defined what you thought was funky and you decided on something, right? You decided on maybe a crazy picture of an elephant, or I don't know, maybe it was a idea of you and the last time you went out dancing, right? Maybe that was 2019 dancing at the club. Maybe that's what you think is funky, or maybe it's an album cover from 1970s Parliament, great funk band. Yeah. Now the next question, of course, has to be, does your customer agree? And you might be like, hey, wait a minute, Mike, who's my customer? I thought I was supposed to come up with something funky and I defined it and I came up with something I think it's funky. Who's my customer? And I would ask you, well, I asked you to come up with something funky. What if I don't agree with you? What if I don't think that your funky thing is actually funky? Maybe I think funky is, 3 dots on a page. I don't know. Maybe my definition is totally different from yours. So then the question is, did you fail? Did you fail the exercise? Well, I mean, if I disagree with your idea of funky, if I don't think your, album cover of Parliament is funky, then maybe you failed, right? Because I don't like what you came up with. And yet you decided on something that you were convinced was funky. And so I think for you, you're right, right? So for me, you're wrong. And for you, you're right. And so the question has to be, because we're talking about branding today, who gets to define your brand? If you think your brand's funky and you think a certain way of visualizing that funkiness or writing about that funkiness or expressing that funkiness is funky, right? And I'm your customer and I disagree with you, who gets to define what your brand is? And I would argue, and I'm going to make this argument throughout today, that you get to define your brand. It is your brand after all, right? As much as we love our customers in our businesses, and they're so important to a business, right? Without our customers, without our clients, we are nothing. And yet it's our brand. It's our culture. It's our identity that we get to work on and put out into the world. And so really, like, you shouldn't be relying on your customer to fully define your brand for you. There's another part that your customer plays in this process. Let's talk about that. So if you have a brand and your customers agree with you, they're going to tell you, right? And you can probably think of what I'm going to say next as to how they're going to tell you, right? They're going to tell you with cash, with money, right? They're going to put money down and they're going to buy your product because they say, yeah, your brand, it seems like there's some value there and I'm willing to put the money up to see if that value is going to play out. They'll probably even do something else if they really agree with your brand. They might actually become an advocate for you, right? Someone who says, yes, I want to tell my friends or I want to tell my colleagues at work about this experience I had with this new brand that I found. That's how customers are going to tell you that they agree with your brand. And that's a really important piece of feedback in the branding process. If you're out there and you think you're working on your brand and you're building it and you're not getting agreement from your customers, there's probably something wrong with the way that you're going about your branding. Because what they're going to do is not agree with you, right? It's the inverse of agreement is money on the table and maybe advocacy for your brand. And the inverse of that is, well, they're not going to put money on the table. They're not going to buy from you. And ultimately, some of them are probably going to maybe even badmouth you. Although that's not super common, right? That's a little more rare. But probably they're not going to do business with you. And I think if that's the case you're in, if that's the place you're at with your business, I think you need to be asking yourself, one, am I communicating and behaving according to my brand definition, right? When I went and defined funky, am I actually living out the definition I had for funky? Or maybe I'm not doing it well enough, right? Maybe there's something I could be doing better. Am I maybe not being as consistent as I should be? Or maybe I'm not like pushing it as hard as I could, right? Those are some things you want to start thinking about. But you could also, and let's consider this scenario, it could be that you just have the wrong customers. Your branding is good, right, to some degree, but maybe you've been chasing the wrong audience with your brand. Maybe the way that you want to put yourself out in the world is not really how your target customers that you're talking to and interfacing with and putting your ads and marketing in front of, that's just not resonating with them. So maybe the question is, are you actually talking to the right people? Are you putting your brand in front of the right people? And probably it's a combination of one and two, right? Let's be honest, right? A business is a process and we don't get it all right on day one. And sometimes we have to work through that, right? We've got to be more consistent. We got to be more compelling and we got to be finding the right people that are really the right people to be attracted to us. And that's what we're going to talk about today as we get into this. We're going to talk about really finding that intersection of what you do and why it's so important to the right people, right? And we'll talk more about that as we get into brand story. But first, I want to talk a little bit about this company. I think you know this company. I think most people in the world understand that the swoosh is Nike, right? And I want to talk about Nike, not now, but Nike when it was first started and for its first decade, maybe 2 decades. Back in the 1970s, Phil Knight founded Nike. And over the course of about 15 years, they built it up into a fairly successful business. But it really only had one primary product. It was a running shoe company for professional athletes. They were super targeted, right? Only professional athletes, professional runners at that. My goodness, how more niche can you get? And only shoes. That was all they produced. And I mean, they were high quality, superior technology shoes. And they had built a whole culture around that positioning. They had R&D people, they had designers, they had everyone working together towards that one singular end of, we're going to make the best running shoes for professional runners that we possibly can. What's interesting is that Phil Knight didn't really ever have a vision that was that contained, that was that narrow, that was that small for his company. He really saw and thought from day one that they could be something bigger, something more than just for this very niche market for professional runners. And so he took the company in the late 70s, early 80s through a very transformative process, bringing in the right people in order to really expand their market, really say, hey, we can be so much more than just a running shoe company for professional runners. And as they engaged on that process, they came out with an advertising campaign. And they thought, we need an ad campaign to kind of tell the world that we're doing more than just running shoes. So let's put our heads together. We'll get an agency. We'll work together, and we'll come up with a tagline, because that's what every great ad campaign has, is a good tagline. We'll run it for 18 months like a good campaign, and then maybe we'll retire it. We'll come up with another piece of messaging, and we'll just keep going from there, right? That's typically how ad campaigns go. Instead, they came up with this. And what's interesting about this tagline is that this tagline has lasted far, far longer than anyone expected it to. When they came into the process, they thought, yeah, we need a tagline that lasts 18 months. If we get 3 years out of it, oh my goodness, that would be amazing. That'd be an incredible campaign headline. And now they stumbled onto this tagline. I don't know if they really stumbled, and that's what we'll get to. But they had this tagline that has spanned the test of time. They still use it in advertising. We still see it today, and we know exactly whose tagline that is, right? And they haven't even, I don't think they've even run it as an official campaign headline in 10 years, and yet people still know it. The Just Do It campaign is one of the most successful ad campaigns ever. And why is that? Is that because they brought all these really smart people on board, and they got, the biggest up and coming agency on the planet to work with them? Well, that certainly helped, right? But I think it's because the Just Do It tagline encapsulates the story of Nike, their brand story. Because the Just Do It tagline says, just do it. And that is the ethos of Nike at its heart. Nike at its heart is not a shoe company. Nike at its heart is not a running company. Nike at its heart is not a pro athlete company. Nike at its heart is a company that helps people achieve victory in their athletic lives. Doesn't matter what kind of products and services that requires them to develop in order to live out that purpose. And this tagline exactly encapsulates that story. And I think that's why this tagline has been so effective for them. And that's what I want to talk about today, is finding your story that doesn't just tell people what you do, doesn't just tell people that they're the right person for you, right? Those are important things, but that actually gets to the heart, the essence of why your brand even exists at all, what your purpose is. That should be part of your story. That should be at the heart of your story. And if you have that at the heart, you're going to have a story that, one, is going to last. Two, it's going to really compel people and make them go, yes, I want to find out more. I want to buy your products. I want to have a relationship with your brand, because it is grounded in something real and long lasting, right? It's not just a product. It's not just a service. There's an actual essence. There's an ethos behind it. And that's what I want to talk about today. So I'm here to challenge you today as to what a brand is and is not. And you might disagree with me at points today, and that is totally fine. But as long as you stick with me and you kind of listen and you understand where I'm coming from, maybe you'll have a better understanding of branding in general, even if we disagree on a few points here and there, right? But I'm going to challenge you to think a little bit differently probably than you have in the past about brand. And I also want to help start defining your authentic brand. I think this is a place where a lot of companies, a lot of businesses, a lot of entrepreneurs and founders can get a little hung up. They can maybe shortcut some things and try to skip over the authentic part. And there's real ramifications down the road for taking shortcuts with your brand. And we'll talk about that. And then finally, I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to give you a process to start building on what makes your brand remarkable and how to communicate that through your brand story. So to start out, we got to set the stage, right? What is a brand? What is it not? A lot of people, when they think about a brand, they might think about the name, right? And certainly you can have a very powerful name for your brand. I mean, look at these. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've called any random brand of tissue a Kleenex, right? What a great name, and what a great job they've done establishing that as synonymous with their product. Popsicle. Who even knew that Popsicle was a trademark registered name? My goodness, I use that term all the time. And yet if I said a brand is a name, you would say, no, Mike, no, there's so much more to a brand than just its name. It's important. It's certainly very important. Just like our names are important, right, as individuals. But there's more to it. All right, I'll give you that. Okay, there's more to it. Let's add in some visuals. All right, some great logos, right? We even got Nike back on here. I bet you can recognize almost all these logos just by their image. You don't even have to see their name and you know who they are. My kids see the arches, the McDonald's arches, the M, and on the road, and they have no idea anything else about McDonald's except they know that's McDonald's, right? They know it right from that logo. And they haven't been around that long. McDonald's didn't have to work too hard to actually brand themselves into my kids' brains. It's crazy. And yet if I said a brand is its logo, you would say, no, Mike, there's more to it than that. Like, I can't just have a name and a logo and be done with it. Can I? Yeah, you got to have a little more, right? So maybe you got to have some words, right? I mean, we're all writers, or we all think we are, right? So we got to have some words, right? And yeah, I mean, words are pretty important. I mean, these are significant words here, right? These are taglines that define brands at some level. You can read some of these and go, yeah, I know who that is. Maybe some of them you can't, but some of them you probably can. So words are important too, right? And yet if I said, well, oh, so that's the brand. I just need a name, tagline, and a logo, right? I'm done. You say, oh, no, I think there's a little bit more to it than that. It doesn't feel quite right. Yeah, I think you need a little more. So, okay, let's get some advertising out there. We're not going to actually watch the video here because that's too long and annoying. Here's the Tide ad from Tide from the Super Bowl 2-3 years ago. Pretty well critiqued ad. People really liked it. Critics liked it. They thought it was a really good ad for the Super Bowl. So I was like, who had the best Super Bowl ad that year? And Tide certainly, I think, came out pretty near the top. I mean, they certainly said their name enough times. It was like 18 times that they said their name in there. And then, you know, it's funny, a little bit memorable. It's all good stuff, right? So is that a brand? You know, name, logo, tagline, little ad campaign. Are we done? You can call it a day. And you'd say, no, Mike, like there's more to it than that. I mean, you got to have a product or a service, right? You got to have something to actually give to people that provides value to people, right? Yeah. Okay, fine. You got to have a product and service, and maybe you even think a little bit about the design of those things, the feel, the emotional impact, and how it looks, how it sounds, and all that fun stuff, right? We can think about products like these here. And we recognize we don't have to see the logo. We don't have to see a name. We don't even have to see any colors. And we know exactly who made those products, or at least who sells them, right? Or you can think about this experience. Here's an experience that I think you might see the logo in like a handful of places, not very recognizable. I bet if you covered the logo up, you'd still know exactly which store you're in, that you are in a Starbucks. And what's crazy about Starbucks, you go in almost any Starbucks anywhere in the world, and you would have that same kind of feeling like, yes, this is a Starbucks. This feels Starbucksy, right? And so the question is, if it feels Starbucksy, is that the Starbucks brand? It's just a vague feeling, a combination of words and colors and images that somehow magically together create this kind of branded experience that everyone recognizes? Is that it? Is that the brand? It's just this kind of like really intricate painting job. I'm going to argue that it's not. I'm going to argue that there is something more foundational and fundamental to a brand than all of these things, right? It's all that stuff, right? It's the logo, tagline, name. It's the way you design your products. It's the advertising you put out in the world, the way you communicate. It's all those things, right? Those help create the effects of the brand, right? They create a perception of the brand in your customer's mind, but are they the brand? I don't think so. I think there's actually something more deep and intrinsic. I think there's an essence to your brand that goes beyond those things. And that's because I think your brand is actually your identity. If you're an organization of people, it's the identity of your corporate organization, right? The group of you together pursuing a goal, on a road together, having a sense of purpose, a shared purpose, having a sense, a code of values and behaviors in which you're going to operate, having kind of some tactics or some goals that you have to achieve that purpose. You're doing it together. That's your organizational identity. If it's just you, maybe you're a founder, you're a startup, you're an entrepreneur, maybe a freelancer, you just got your own solopreneur business. Your brand is your identity in that work that you're doing, right? In that purpose that you're out there to do. It's just like your personal identity. It's just at a different level. And because of that, I think it has some deeper meaning, some deeper essence than just these outward external pieces of it, right? Your logo, your colors, your fonts, the words you use, the tagline, your website, all these things are manifestations of your brand, but they're not your brand's essence. And that's what we've really got to hone in on if we really want to have a long-lasting brand. I want to take just a minute and talk about how we got here, right? Because I think it's important. As Jay mentioned, I love history. And I think it's important that we know not only where we are, but how we got from there to here. And I think with branding, we have to understand that as well, because I think we can get tripped up sometimes when we hear the word brand because we don't really understand where it came from, or maybe we still think about it in a way that it used to be thought of, but don't understand how it's actually being thought of today because we don't understand that path that it's been on. So the word brand actually comes from the Norse word or Viking word, brander, right? So if you're thinking about Vikings and Norsemen, or actually Northmen, that's what that means, from Northern Europe. You can think of Scandinavia. That was the word they had. And it literally meant to burn something, right? Literally take two sticks, rub them together, create a fire to burn something. It didn't really matter what it was. There was no intention behind it other than to create a fire, right? To create warmth, to create light, to create something usable for other purposes. That's all it was. But like a lot of words in almost every language, we adopt very concrete meanings of words. We take words that have very concrete meanings and we apply them to some other activity, right? So in this case, it started to become known or be used for marking livestock, right? You would have some livestock, maybe some sheep on your hill, and your neighbors would have some sheep on their hill. And over the course of a day or a week, man, all that sheep, they all get mixed up as they're roaming the hills, chowing down on some vegetation. And at some point, you got to get your sheep back and you're going to go shear them or do whatever you're going to do with them. And your neighbor needs their sheep. And if you didn't mark your sheep, it got really hard to tell whose was whose. And so this idea of a marking, of branding your sheep with a hot iron in order to indicate ownership. These are mine and not theirs, and those are theirs and not mine. And now that we have them separated and it's very clearly marked, we don't have to go to war over whose sheep are whose. That's a great societal efficiency to create a sense of ownership. You extrapolate this forward kind of into a little bit more global era, right? You think about as companies were formed, like East India Company or the Dutch East India Company, or all these different companies who are starting to ship product all over the world in the 15, 16, 1700s. We call this the kind of the mercantile period in parts of the world's history. But you have product going all over the world. And similarly to the sheep, this product would be put into unmarked barrels or crates and shipped from one port to another and unloaded. And man, it'd be really inefficient. You'd have to actually open the crate or the barrel and see what's inside. And in order to know, like, okay, well, what is this and where does it go and who does it go to and what do we do with it, right? And so very quickly it was like, hey, we should actually brand something on it. We should mark it with a brand, a hot brand, because that's a very easy way to mark something very officially in a way that can't rub off. It can't come off. It's like implanted in it, right? It is seared into the side of that barrel. And pretty quickly, customers would see these barrels in the shops or these crates in the shops, and they would go, oh, I recognize that name or that mark on the side of that barrel or that crate. That was the tea that I got last time I was in, and I liked it. And so they would start to ask the shopkeeper, can I have more of that tea that had that marking or that name on it? And now you have like probably the very first instances of what we would call now a logo, right? The idea of marking a product, not only to show ownership, but to actually indicate a sense of quality, right? A standard of quality that we stand behind this product. Our name is on it. And therefore, we are giving it our seal of quality, our mark of quality that you, the customer, can trust that this is going to be as good as the last time you had it, right? And that's where you start to really see the modern idea, the modern concept of branding in a consumer or product-centric world. Now today, the idea of branding has changed quite a bit even since then, right? There's still definitely a sense of ownership, right? You put your mark or your logo on things. You have a sense of standard of quality, right? When we put our name on it, we mean it, right? What you got from us yesterday is what you're going to get from us today, which is what you're going to get from us tomorrow. Those are all really important concepts in branding. But now there's this other side to branding where what you stand for as an organization or as a brand and the mark that you put on things is being adopted also or being identified with by the customer themselves. So here we see in the middle, a man wearing a pair of earbuds. These are probably some of the most famous earbuds in the world, right? We all know that those are Apple earbuds, or at least we're pretty sure. They definitely look like Apple earbuds because they're very distinctively styled in a way that only Apple would do, of course. They understand that their mark is not just their logo or their name. Their mark is how they bring things to the market. It's how they design their products. It's the way in which they communicate about their products. It's all the behaviors that come with being a company. And what's really interesting is they've figured out some things about their audience. One of which is that they have a lot of early adopters within the technology sphere who adopt new technology, not just because it's helpful, but because it says something about them when others see them with it, right? This is one of the reasons why Apple's earbuds are white, is they were one of the first companies to make white earbuds because they saw everyone else had black earbuds. And so one way for their customers to more vocally, right, demonstrate their kind of Apple-ness, the way in which they were early adopters, that they're cool, that they are all the things that they see as Apple also, right? They're identifying with those same marks or traits of Apple, and they want to show others that they are the same, right? And they did that by kind of social posturing with your earbuds. That was back when they were wired, and now they've continued that trend with their wireless AirPods as well. You'll see the same trend going on in cars, right? If you want to think about the original Toyota Priuses, the way they were designed, a lot of people actually thought they were very ugly, and some of that was intentional. The reason that they looked ugly is because they were so different than a lot of cars at the time in the way that they were styled. And that was intentional on Toyota's part. They understood something about early adopters in the electric vehicle market. And that is that early adopters in that market were not just buying cars because they wanted to save on gas or because they wanted to save the environment. They actually were doing it because they wanted other people to know that they cared about the environment. And so to have a very distinctive car that didn't look like any others on the road allowed their early adopter customers to make that social statement with their car as they drove it. That look, hey, look at me. I'm driving an electric vehicle. It's very clearly an electric vehicle because it looks so different than any other cars that you're driving. And there's an element of kind of social identity. We even see this in B2B. Man, if you circle up a bunch of sales reps from different companies and you get them in a room and you get them talking about software that they're using, someone eventually will mention Salesforce and everyone else in the room will be like, oh, you use Salesforce. Oh, that's pretty cool. Tell me more about that. Oh, do you like it? There's an interesting thing that happens with the Salesforce brand because, and this might not be as strong as like an Apple customer kind of reaction or that Toyota Prius reaction. Sure, it's a little more muted, but there's still a reaction to brands in almost every market as to how people see you as a consumer of that particular brand. They make a judgment about you, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, sometimes just, oh, that's the kind of person you are. The brands that we purchase say something about us. That's the social world we live in. And we even make decisions as consumers, sometimes based primarily on how this is going to socially reflect back to the world, what I believe in, what I hold high, what I value in my life. So I think we're starting to edge towards why brand matters. I think you probably are starting to get it if you haven't already, but I want to give you some really definitive examples of why brand matters. So here's the first example. You've got two vehicles. You are shopping for a minivan. This is a scenario that we're working through. And I'm sorry, you have to shop for a minivan right now. That's how this works. Okay. And you've narrowed it down. You got Volkswagen on the right. You've got Chrysler on the left. For those of you kind of familiar with car markets, you'll probably have some kind of idea of which one you like more. So I'll give you 1 second. Think about it. Which one do you want? Gut reaction. All right. About 80% of people that I ask always go for the Volkswagen. And they'll almost always say because of safety or German engineering or some combination or related topic to those two, right? So what we're saying is about 80% of people like the Volkswagen minivan over the Chrysler minivan. All other things kind of looking the same and information that you have. What's really interesting is then I ask, well, what's the fundamental difference between these two vans? Yes, there's some styling differences. There's certainly a different logo on them. Maybe a little bit different creature comfort on the inside. But if we strip all that away, we look at the drivetrain, we look at the engine, we look at all the mechanical parts that really make this a vehicle, right? That perform the function that it's intended to do, which is take a bunch of people, because it's a minivan, take a bunch of people from point A to point B and do it in an economic way, right? And a reliable way. Do both these vans do that? They do. In fact, they do it exactly the same because both of these vans are Chrysler underneath. Volkswagen actually, in this particular model, they did not have a minivan on the market. They were like, hey, we want to put a minivan on the market. What's the fastest way we can do that? Well, we can go to a competitor like Chrysler and say, hey, can we license your van? And we'll style it a little bit different, but it's the same van. And here's what's really interesting. Which one sells for more? The Volkswagen. The Volkswagen definitely sells for significantly more money than the Chrysler. So what does that tell us? Brand has perceived value, right? And in the eye of the customer, it's actual value, right? Those things, German engineering, safety, some kind of aesthetic appeal or whatever it is it's drawing you to Volkswagen actually creates more value for that brand. Not just in a sense of, oh, it draws you, but also in the sense that you are willing to pay more money. That's really, really interesting. Brand actually can create value in and of itself, the exact same product, more value. All right. And there's actual data to prove this out. This was a great study. They broke down a bunch of different consumer brands and they went, these ones are high strength, these ones are mid strength, these ones are low strength. Let's look at the pricing of all their related products that are the same. So they categorized all their products and looked at how pricing landed. High strength brands sold for more money, significantly more. In fact, 13% more than low strength brands on average. That's crazy. You get a 13% lift on average because you have a better brand. That's really cool. All right. So here's another scenario for you. Here we've got two logos on the window of this car. Do you recognize both of them? Hopefully you can say yes. What are they, right? And you would say, well, the top one's Uber, the bottom one is Lyft. How do you know? Well, because they're different, right? And they clearly mark their name or their mark, their symbol. So again, let's think about their product. Is it going to get you from point A to point B at roughly the same time for the same cost in almost the exact same app? I mean, their apps are nearly identical. Yes, it is. In fact, are you even going to get a different driver? Well, sometimes you won't even get a different driver. In fact, this driver right here has both displayed in his window or her window, right? So what is their brand doing for them? Well, it might be creating perceived value like we saw in the last exercise, but it's doing something else as well. Their brands are different and they're helping customers to make a choice. What's really interesting is the human brain is designed to conserve calories, right? And decision making, that process of thinking about options and researching and then coming to an actual final decision costs calories. And our brains, again, are trained, they're designed, they're trained over time to conserve those calories and save them for really important things. And if your decision is just not that important, if it's difficult to make that decision because I don't understand the difference between these two options, then your brain will actually shut down and it will resolve back to the easiest or lowest common denominator decision-making process, which for most people has been and continues to be lowest cost, right? And so when we as brands, if we're creating a brand and we really want to create value for our customers, one of the ways we can do that is just by simply being different than our competitors, right? We are us and they are them. They are them and we are us and we are different, right? So here's a great example in this market with Uber and Lyft. Lyft is pink, Uber is black. So different from a visual standpoint, and it works. You're really not getting this very different product most of the time that I've experienced, and yet you make a decision. And what's really interesting is they still have affinity. Like I will personally buy more from Lyft than I will from, I always go to Lyft first. I just have a personal affinity towards Lyft and some of the non-tangible things that they've done. So there you go. So differentiation, that's a tremendous value that brand brings. Here's one more. All right, we'll fly through this last one pretty quick. We've already seen this brand today. This is Nike, of course. How is it that Nike can produce so many different products? Why is it that, they're not just a shoe company, right? Well, I think one part of it is that their brand intrinsically creates loyalty. They have a good brand, right? And so when they put their mark on something, people who've already bought from them go, yeah, I liked what I bought from you before. I bought the shoes and now I'm willing to buy the basketball. I'm willing to buy the socks. I'm willing to download the world's most downloaded running app, right? Nike's brand creates a sense of loyalty. We see this time and time again in market after market, right? Brands that are really well developed and really well executed and are on point about what they believe in and how their essence and their ethos. Think again about that story about Nike, right? Nike has never drifted from their core essence, helping people achieve victory in their athletic lives. Then it doesn't matter what products that they offer, right? Look at all those products. As long as all their products are delivering on that purpose, they can sell all of them. And once one person has purchased from them and they trust them a little bit, they're willing to trust them again with another purchase, because it is easier to develop a relationship or continue a relationship you already have than to develop a new relationship with a new brand, right? Nike's customers stick with them partially because it's just easier. Sometimes it's because they love them. Sometimes it's because they only want to have Nike swooshes on everything they wear. That's true. But a lot of them just do it because it's easier, right? We go where it's easy. And if we already have a relationship with someone, we'll continue to come back. That's how it works. And there's data that proves this out. There's also data to show that you can increase your sales volume because of brand, right? It makes your advertising and marketing more efficient and you will sell more for the same amount of money. It also creates value for your company itself. The estimated percentage value of total intellectual property of publicly traded companies. So If you took a publicly traded company and you said, all right, how much of this company's value is their intellectual property? Okay, it's this chunk right here. Well, 20% of that chunk is their brand. The brand itself is worth money. Investors are willing to invest in the brand itself. If they were to sell the company, a portion of that sale would be so that someone else could acquire the brand itself, regardless of everything else that they have to offer, all their capital and all their assets. And I would argue in a crowded marketplace, and let's be honest, every single marketplace is crowded. You might be creating the next new thing in your category. That could be very well true. And yet your category will be crowded. Why is that? Not because you have competitors, but because every single customer, potential customer you have, their attention is limited, and there has never been more messaging put in front of them at any point in history, right? And so whether you're selling the latest, greatest, newest technology that has zero competition on the planet because you literally just invented it, or you're selling in one of the most like traditional markets, there's a bazillion competitors, everyone is vying for your customer's attention. And that is why every marketplace is crowded. And that's why brand wins in a crowded marketplace. All right. So now we're going to dig into how do you develop your brand. So what gives you the best chance of building a strong brand foundation? Well, I would argue it's the truth, right? And there's a reason for that. The reason is the alternatives suck. The alternatives are you build something fake, false, or forced, right? And when you build something fake, false, and forced, how long is it before your customers figure you out and they run? It doesn't take very long, especially in today's world. Every single customer, every single client of yours talks to every other one, right? They have the opportunity to, like we know that. If you looked at Twitter at any point, you literally, if someone has a Twitter account, you can talk to them. That's insane. That's the world we live in. Doesn't matter where they live. Doesn't matter what language they speak. It doesn't matter what culture they're from. Now, you might lose some stuff in translation, but you can talk to them. That's incredible, right? That's the world we live in, which means if you're building your brand on anything that is false, forced, or fake, it's going to fall apart quickly. Your customers are going to find you out. You're going to find the bad reviews. They're going to badmouth you. They're going to tell their friends and neighbors that you suck, right? That's just the reality. If you don't do this based on the truth of who your brand is, the identity that you have. So we have to ask, how do we find that truth? Well, I think it starts with 4 fundamental questions. And these are the questions I think you have to ask, and you have to go deep, and you have to do the hard work to really know the answers. You can't just be like, well, I think it's this. That's good enough. We don't need to talk about it again. You've got to work at these. If you don't really know the answer, and certainly if you don't know how to communicate the answer, then you are not going to create a compelling brand. So we got to start with these 4. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? What vision for the world do you see in your little corner of the world that you are building with your brand? What do you see? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go? What kind of vision do you have? And as clear as you can get it right now today, do it, right? And it might change down the road, and that's okay. But do it today. And then the second question you need to ask is, what do I really value? What do we really value as we're building this brand, right? If you're doing it in an organization, what do you really value? What are the constraints that are going to guide our decision-making? What are the beliefs that are going to drive our behaviors? If we don't really understand those things, we will find ourselves infinitely attracted to just an endless number of distractions. If we don't have clarity on how we're going to get there, not just in the tactics, but actually in the core values that are going to drive decisions, the non-negotiables of our organization, of our brand, all right? That's what I mean by value. All right, and then you have to ask a third question. Well, how's it all going to feel? What kind of personality are we going to exude because of this purpose and these values? And then finally, how do you tie it all together? What is that story that you're going to tell that really helps people to understand and get behind that you have something remarkable to bring to the table for them that will actually really help them, right? That's what you're doing when you create a brand. You're telling a story that says we, or I, in my brand, have something remarkable to bring to the table for my customers, for my clients. That's it. That's really your story in a nutshell. All right. If you want to look at actual like kind of deliverables, sometimes that's helpful. These questions should lead you to these four fundamental tools. One is your vision, right? And that should be a concise statement of where you want to go or what purpose you have or what you're trying to achieve in the world through your brand. The second are your core values. What's that short list, right? It's a defined list. It needs to be short so you can remember it and hold everybody accountable to it. What are the things that we hold really high in our organization that we never sacrifice, that we don't negotiate on? What are the things we really care about? That's what those are. And then what's our personality, right? How are we going to bring this to bear on the world? How are we going to act? And then finally, what are we going to say, which is your brand story? And that's what we're going to really focus on for the rest of this talk today. I'm going to dig deep into brand story. You got to do these other things. We don't have time today to go through all of these. It would take me a full day, honestly, to get through all these in a talk like this. But you got to have them all. You can't just have the story. You've got to have all three of these, and they'll actually help inform your story. So let's talk about brand story. What is it? And I know a lot of you are writers, so hopefully some of this is review for you. This isn't new information because I think storytelling and knowing how to create a great story is fundamental to good writing, and it is fundamental to good branding because at the end of the day, a brand is putting out a message into the world, which requires you to write. We all know that. We do that all the time for our clients. So that's what we're going to hone in on today. So I do have a worksheet for you. If you want to grab it, it's here. You can get the link here, rsnd.co/brand-story. I'll also have the link throughout the deck, so you don't have to worry about trying to like grab it right away and, oh no, I'm going to miss it. I'll have it again. It's on a lot of slides. If you didn't notice already, down at the bottom, rsnd.co/cmvs is this deck. You can go grab it. So if you feel like you're going to miss something and you just want to pay attention to the content, then just know you can go grab that deck and you can come back and get all these links and all the stuff that you need. But we have a worksheet because we have a process for creating a brand story that I want to share with you. I want you to have it. And you can go get it with that worksheet. I'm also going to outline it here in this presentation. So just follow along, take some notes if you want to, or just grab the worksheet or grab the deck, whatever works, whatever works for you. So what is a brand story? Well, I think it's short. It's 2 to 3 sentences. It needs to be concise enough that you can use it and bring it to bear or bring it to mind in a lot of different places and when you're creating content. And we'll talk about that in a couple minutes, but it needs to be short. It needs to be concise. I would say if you're getting beyond a paragraph, man, even 2 paragraphs I think is too much, right? You're not being clear enough. You're not being succinct enough. You're not being focused enough if you can't get it down into a few sentences. And I have some examples later I'll show you, and that'll help you kind of understand why it needs to be short. But it needs to be short. It needs to be 2 to 3 sentences. It's going to have characters. Every great story has characters. If you're familiar with Joseph Campbell, that is someone that you need to become familiar with if you're not already. He concepted an idea called the hero's journey. And he was a philosopher. He was a professor. He studied the history of storytelling. And he, over looking at thousands of years of stories, came up with a formula for creating a great story. And he called it the hero's journey. I've taken that and I've boiled it down into only a few pieces because his is 12 pieces, which, to be honest, I think is a lot for a lot of businesses who are trying to tell a story. We're not writing the next great American novel. We're not creating some great blockbuster movie or some 12-season TV show. We don't need the entire hero's journey to tell a really good story and compelling story for our business, for our brand, right? We just need the really key pieces in order to be able to be very clear when we're telling our story. But every great story has characters. It must have characters. And we'll talk about who those characters are in a minute. And like a great story, it's going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's going to start somewhere, that's going to lead to somewhere else, that is going to end in a final place. There is progression in your story. So when we say beginning, middle, end, we don't just mean that there are sections to it, right? What we mean is that there's a progression in this story. And we'll get into what that progression looks like. And then ultimately, your brand story is going to inform all of your content for your brand. That way, whenever you're producing content, you're actually telling the same story, right? Now, you might be telling it in different ways. You might be taking out certain pieces of your story and really expanding on them, expounding on them, right? But over the course of all of your content, your customers and your clients should be experiencing literally the same story throughout all of it, right? Make it interesting, make it creative. We can all be creative people, right? We all have elements of creativity. Creativity is not just defined by cool images and the ability to write poetry. I don't know if that's the epitome of writing with creativity. Creativity just means that we can think interesting thoughts, right? That we can connect interesting, disparate ideas. That's possible. We all have that capacity, no matter what our technical background is, no matter what our training is, no matter what our industry is. We can all be creative. Apply that creativity to all your content, but keep it with the same brand story surrounding all of it. All right, so we talked about characters. I want to dive into this a little bit. Every great story really only has two characters. And we're going to use an example here of Star Wars, and in particular, Luke Skywalker and Yoda. So every great story, and this falls with Joseph Campbell pretty lockstep, right? He has a hero, and that hero meets a guide. Every great story has a hero. Every great story has a guide. The question in your brand story is, well, who's the hero and who is the guide? A lot of people, when I ask this question, I say, well, who's the hero in your brand story? And they would say, well, it's a brand story, so it must be the brand. And the answer to that is no. Your brand is not the hero of your story. And here's why. The hero in a story always starts with a problem that they cannot solve for themselves, right? So if we think about Luke for a minute here, Luke in the story of Star Wars has a specific problem. He has a lot of problems, but he has one very specific one. Sorry. He has a very specific problem. His specific problem is that he has this ability, this special ability to use the Force. He has the Force, but he has no idea how to use it, how to master it, and how, like, what purpose does that have in his life? Why does he have it? And what is he supposed to go do with it? And that's not a problem that he can solve for himself. He can't train himself. He can't go find a bunch of books on it because there are no books about the Force. He can't go watch some YouTube videos. He can't take some online course and get a certification. He's stuck. Like, he has no solution to it until he is told that there is a master who can help him, who can teach him to use the Force, and that is Yoda. And Yoda is the guide for Luke. Now, unlike Luke, the guide in the story, and in this case Yoda, does not have a problem, at least not one that we know of, because it's not about him. This story is about Luke, right? And so we focus on Luke, who has the problem. And Yoda is in the story in order to provide the solution to Luke. The guide in your story is the brand. It is you, right? Your hero is the one with the problem. And the hero in your story is not you. It's your customer. Your customer is the one who has a problem that they cannot solve for themselves. They need help, right? And you are that help. Your brand is that help. Your products or your services are the solutions that you're going to bring to bear to help them solve their problem and finally come to a resolution, right? Which is that their life becomes better. They solve their problem and their life becomes better because of it. Luke doesn't just master the Force. That's important. Yoda does accomplish that with him. They figure that out. But that's not the fundamental change that happens with Luke. The fundamental change is multifaceted for Luke, which is really what makes it a great, compelling story, is that Luke not only learns to master the Force and figures out how to use it, which is important, but even more importantly, he figures out how to use it for good and how to apply it to save the galaxy, right? To defeat the empire, to save the galaxy, to become, in some sense, a savior. And this is where we get tripped up in a lot of storytelling. We equate savior with hero. And the reality is the hero in the story is not a savior. They might become a savior at some point in the story, but they are not the savior necessarily in their story. The actual savior in your story is the guide, if you want to be like clear about it. And then in this particular story, the hero becomes the master, the guide for others later on, right? So that's a really cool story that you can talk about. We could get into like layers and layers beyond this talk. I don't get into that today, but there's some really cool ways you can layer stories kind of on top of each other like that. But for your brand story, you have a hero who is your customer, who has a problem, and you are the guide. Your brand is the guide with your products and services, which are the solutions to bring about a fundamental change to your customer's life. Right? You make their life better in some kind of way. So in your story, you need to be thinking really hard about your hero. Who are they? What makes them interesting, right? I know Jay talks a lot about, we've been getting to know Jay, and he loves to talk about niche, right? Understanding your niche, understanding who you are uniquely adept at helping. That is what this part of the brand story is all about. It's about finding the unique person or people or roles in the world or companies in the world or whoever it is that you provide products and services for that you are uniquely suited to serve. Not everyone. If the answer is, well, who is my hero? Everyone's my hero. No, that is not the answer. The answer is someone specific. If it's helpful, start with your best customer. Start with your best client and start to list out all the attributes. What makes them really good for me? What makes them really good for our brand? What makes them really good for our business? Why is it that they are such a great customer for us? And now you'll start to paint a persona, a character for your hero. And you need to be identifying in that process what their particular problems are, right? What are the pain points that they have? What are the symptoms of maybe underlying issues that you can help them solve? What is it that your product or service helps them overcome in their business or in their life, right? Whatever it is that you're bringing to bear on the market. And then you need to work on the guide, which is you. It's your brand, right? Who is your brand? Be really specific. Know your vision. Know your values. Know your personality. Know the actual specific products and services that you have and how they are uniquely suited. And you as a whole, as a total brand, are uniquely suited to help your specific hero solve their problem, right? So you got to know what your solutions are, right? You got to know your products and services. And then you got to put it all together into a story. And that's what I'm going to help you do right now is think through how to piece these different elements together into a cohesive story. This is where we start to talk about beginning, middle, and end, right? That progression. Probably already starting to put those pieces together, but we'll map it out here. And we're going to do it through a fictitious company. I'm going to essentially, with you right now, write a brand story for this fictitious company called Smileco. It's not a real company. I made it up. I made up their story. It's totally fake, but it will demonstrate to you this progression from beginning to middle to end and how we can pull in all the pieces of our hero and their problem, the guide and the solution and the happy ending all together into one story. Okay, so it's kind of like a Mad Libs version of creating a brand story. So the beginning of your story is always what is the state of the union for your hero before you are on the scene. Not before you exist, but before they know about you, right? They have not met your brand. So what is the state of the union for your hero, for the customer? So you would start this. You could fill in the blank in order to answer this question. Say, before we were here, and then fill in the blank, right? So for our company, we could say, before we were here, preschoolers were sad. That's my Smileco company. So right off the bat, we identify two things in that statement. Before we were here, the preschoolers, so that's our customer, preschoolers, were sad, and that's their problem, right? This is a little formulaic, right? but it's going to help you to start unblanking the page so that you can write your own brand story and know that you're hitting all the pieces that you need to have in your story before you go make it all creative. It's kind of like your outline, right? All right, so you would write it for you before we were here, and then talk about your hero. Who's the hero of your story? Who's this customer, and what problem or problems do they have? All right, so the middle is the arrival of the brand. Luke meets Yoda, right? So what happens when your hero meets you and your brand as the guide? How does your arrival help them? What do you bring to bear on their particular problem? Right? This is where you get to state your products and services, maybe some really key attributes of those things. You would fill in the blank here by starting with, then we showed up and fill in the blank. So for our fake company SmileCo, we could say, then we showed up with our SmileCo Smile Paint vending machines. All right, there's our product. And preschoolers realized they didn't have to be sad. All right. It's a little formulaic. It's a little basic. I know there's some issues there. We can clean those up later, right? Right now, we're just trying to fill in the blanks. All right, so write it for yours. Then we showed up. What happened, right? What did you bring? What was it that you brought to the table to help? And how does it not make a difference, right? Because we haven't gotten there yet. That's actually the ending. We're jumping ahead. But what do they realize? What does the customer realize, the hero realize about what you bring to bear? So and then the ending, right? So then we got to wrap it all up. What are you doing for your customer? What difference do you make for them? They overcome their problem, and what happens in their life, right? So the difference we made, that's what you can start with to write your ending. For SmileCo, we could say the difference we made is that preschoolers painted smiles on their faces and made each day of school a little happier. So write it for you. The difference we made, fill in the blank. Okay. Now I want to take you on a little alternate ending version of your story. So you just wrote the difference we made and you fill in the blank, right? This positive difference, the change that you made in your hero's life through using your products and services. But what happens if the hero doesn't use you, right? So this is that kind of alternate ending, sad story. This is really helpful. And we could write it for SmileCo. It might be like, when we weren't there, preschoolers didn't have a way to express happiness in their experience. Their school experience was less joyful. Right. So now we kind of know that there's a degression. It's not just that they stay status quo. Like before we were here, they were sad and they just stay sad. No, it's that before we were here, they were sad, these preschoolers, and they never met us. They never got any of the vending machines, smile paint, whatever things. Right. And man, like they didn't have a way to actually express happiness. And because of that, their school experience suffered, right? There's a degression. So when they go with you, there's a progression. Things get better, right? And when they don't use you, there's a degression. You need to be really clear and understanding the difference between those two scenarios. Now, there's a caveat. Don't go and publish your alternate ending with your customers, right? You will make them sad. You will make them depressed. You will make them go, oh, life sucks because I didn't go with you, or I might not go with you. Don't do that. That's fear mongering, first of all, right? We're using fear. And we know that that's kind of a fundamental of marketing is you want to be really careful about using fear to drive decision because it actually will backfire on you in the end. If your brand is all about fear, guess what your brand becomes all about? Fear, right? And people don't really want to hang out with people they're afraid of, right? If you want people to hang out with your brand and really like your brand and have an affinity towards your brand, you don't want to be using fear all the time to motivate them. Okay. So the reason we do this alternate ending is not so that you go out and communicate all these bad things that are going to happen to people because they didn't go with you, right? That's manipulative. It just doesn't work, honestly, in the long run. You might get some short-term sales through it, but it's going to really get nasty really quick. The reason you do that is so that you can communicate the happy ending even better, right? Because you know in the back of your head what the sad ending is. You know what that degression looks like versus the progression. So that's why we write the what if ending, right? So you could write that for you. All right, and then we're going to put it all together. We can get creative, right? This is where you can use that creativity, whatever ounce of creativity you've got, put it into this, right? And you can make it really interesting. I'm not going to read this because it reads like a really sappy ad. I'll be brutally honest. It is sappy, but it works, right? You can read it and go, oh yeah, actually that sounds like might be a script for an ad. I could see that. And that's a good thing to shoot for. Can you get your brand story to a point where you want to actually read it with some visuals, playing and on a little video, and you've got yourself an ad? Does it make enough sense, right? Is it clear enough and also compelling because you've put some creativity into it? And that's a whole nother talk for another time around how to be creative. But you can do it. So this is your baseline brand story. It's probably going to feel a little basic. It's going to feel a little formulaic, and that's okay because that's a great place to start. So now I want to talk about how you're going to make it remarkable. And this is where you're going to apply some of that creativity and some interesting techniques to really make it remarkable. So remarkable brand stories do a few things. I'm going to give you 4 things that they do. One is they weave the pieces together covertly. So you remember I gave you beginning, middle, end. There's this very clear progression, the hero, the guide, the problem, the solution, like all the pieces are there. And when we wrote that story for SmileCo, it was very clear what each piece was. It probably felt like an outline. If you were doing your own, it'll feel like an outline. And that's not usually very interesting. We don't really like to go read outlines. Nobody likes to read the syllabus for their course they're taking because it's an outline, right? But we'll read a book. We'll definitely read books because it's been interesting. And sometimes one way to make something interesting, or in this case, remarkable, is to move the pieces around. Start with the end, start with the middle, end with the beginning. Do something interesting with it. All right. So here's an example. I'm not going to go through this in detail, but Virgin America has a great story. They start with the beginning, and in the beginning, they have their problem, although it's stated, interestingly, as their mission, make flying good again. And then the middle is actually the happy ending, right? It's all the benefits that people get. And then lastly, they end with the middle, which is all the attributes of their product. So that's a really good, simple example of moving the pieces around covertly. Another way that you can make it remarkable is infer the hero's problem from the solution. So don't state the problem outright, infer it from the solution that you provide. Beats Audio does a good job with this. They say they help bring the energy, emotion, and excitement of playback in the recording studio back to the listening experience. So they're not stating directly like, oh, listening to music sucks right now. They could say that, and maybe that's interesting to their audience, but instead they say it in this more positive way. They let people infer things like what is the problem that they're having. And there's some sense in that you are relying on your audience to connect the dots a little bit. It also means that your story can be more positive, right? Because if you're constantly stating the problem, it can feel a little obtuse. It can feel a little direct. It can feel a little negative. And if you want to be more positive with your brand, this is a great way to do that. Another way that you can make it remarkable is not explicitly state your audience. Again, stating your audience like we are so-and-so and we help blah, blah, blah companies, or we help certain kinds of people like this. That can be helpful. It can be very clear, but there are probably more creative ways or more compelling ways to tell people or show people that they are the right audience for you. You'll see this a lot with brands in the way they use visuals, right? You think about ads that you see, almost never do they state who they're targeting with their ad, but they'll show you tons of people that are in their target market, right? Or doing certain activities that relate to the kinds of people that they want to get in front of. And that's interesting because GoPro does just that in their kind of brand story, which is they say, like how a day on the mountain with friends is more meaningful than one spent alone, the sharing of our collective, blah, 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 blah. But the point of this is they never actually say who it is that is a GoPro customer or an ideal customer. Instead, they paint a picture of using GoPro. So they say, like how a day on the mountain with friends, and you kind of have this mental image. They don't even talk about what they were doing on the mountain. Were they snowboarding? Were they mountain biking? Were they just like walking and hiking? It doesn't really matter because the kinds of people that are going to go use GoPros, that GoPro feels like they're really well suited to serve, are people who like to do outdoor stuff with their friends, right? So that's really cool. They've identified that. And then lastly, I'll give you one more tip on how to make it more remarkable is leverage your founder story. So if you're the founder or you have a founder in your company, they might have a really interesting story about how you have founded your brand. And you can bring that into your brand story. Warby Parker does a great job of this. They essentially paint this picture of their founder who lost his glasses while backpacking, I think in Europe, and had a hard time replacing them. And so he went and created a company called Warby Parker to help solve that problem for other people. What's really cool is it makes them as a guide, right? Warby Parker, the brand, is the guide in the story. It makes them uniquely suited to help others solve the same problem because they've already had the problem and solved it, right? So they showcase their expertise and their empathy with people who have their customers, right? Who have that problem. There's some more examples here. If you grab the deck, again, that link is in the bottom, rsnd.co/cmvs. You can grab the deck. You can read these. There's actually my brand story for my agency right here. If you want to kind of see how we approach this, we take a little bit more philosophical view. We put a little bit of our mission in there, which I really like. So now we got to talk about, well, how do you use these brand stories? All right. Well, first, right off the bat, you literally have a 2 to 3 sentence summary of your entire brand. So I don't know why that wouldn't be your elevator pitch. That should be in every presentation you give, every pitch that you put in front of a customer, every time you go networking, every time you meet someone new and they ask you, oh, who are you and what do you do? Instead of giving them that garbage answer of like, well, I'm so-and-so and I work at such and such a company and I have X job title, which means nothing to them. You can actually tell them, we solve these problems for these people by doing this. And here's the great happy ending that it provides for those people. Now, they might not be your customer. They might not be the right person, but they'll definitely go, oh yeah, that makes total sense. I get that. That's interesting. More likely than not, they're going to ask you and be like, oh yeah, tell me more about that. How do you guys do that? Can you tell me some stories? Right? That's incredible. I love brand stories for this very reason. It's one of my favorite kind of outcomes. Is almost every client I've ever worked with who has a good brand story, they come out of the process and they're like, hey, I used it with a family member. I used it with a colleague. I used it when I was networking. And wow, I got this response from people. It was so positive and I loved it, right? Because people finally, for the first time, actually understand what they do. You can do some other stuff. You can version it. So if you have a complex brand, and some brands are, right, you might have a variety of kind of sub segments to your brand. Then you might want to create versions of your story, right? And it still needs to be the same overall story, but maybe there's different ways of saying it for different of those sub segments of your audience. Maybe they use a little different language. Maybe they have different terms. Plug those in. Create a few different variations of your brand story that you can kind of pick and pull when you need to, when you're talking to different audiences. If your brand story isn't good enough to be on the homepage of your website, I would argue your brand story isn't good enough. You need to keep working on it. It should be so clear, so concise, so compelling, and interesting, right? That people, it should just go right on the homepage and it's the first thing that you say to people. It can become a great boilerplate for all sorts of different places where you have to say something about us, right? Who are we? We have 3 sentences to say it. Well, your brand story is 3 sentences, so that's a great thing to use. And it's really clear and it's concise and it's compelling. So if you're creating a brochure, sales sheets, press releases, if you're being interviewed and somebody asks you, well, tell me about your company in a very short amount of time, your brand story is the perfect tool to whip out and have ready. And then really, I think the real power in your brand story is that it's that story that you get to tell through all of your content. It becomes inspiration for every piece of content for your brand. So again, like we're talking 2 to 3 sentences. You don't get a lot of time and a lot of detail on any of those elements. Like who is our hero in our story? What are all these problems they're having, right? Who are we? Who are we as the guide? What are our core values? What's our mission? What's our purpose? What unique things do we bring to the table? What's the makeup of our team? What's interesting about all of our products and services? What are all the features and benefits? You get to break all of those out. Those are all part of that story. You're not telling every single last iota of detail in your core brand story. But that's where you have lots of opportunity with blog posts, newsletters, ebooks, articles, publications, videos, podcasts. I mean, the number of kinds of media that you can create now is nearly endless. So just be creative, every social media post. But what needs to be really clear is that when you see all these pieces going out, you can connect the dots and go, yep, they're all telling the same story, because that is what your customers are going to experience. Your customers don't buy from you after one blog post. They don't buy from you from one ad, typically. They don't buy from you from like one social post. They buy from you after building a relationship with all of your media, right? With this content you've put out in front of them. And if they don't have clarity of the story that you're telling them throughout all of it, they're going to get lost, right? Somebody else is going to tell that story better than you. They're going to tell their story. And it's going to cut through, and they're going to end up with those people instead of you. So lastly, my favorite thing, go write a book, right? Your brand story should be inspirational enough that you want to write a book about it. It might not be a long book. It doesn't have to be a long book. Maybe it is a really long book. Maybe you have a really complicated, deep, philosophical brand story. Cool. I'm all for that. You write a book about it. That'd be awesome. And so I'm going to give you some homework here today. This is your take-home homework. So first thing is you need to have a goal for your homework. Your homework is you're going to craft a brand story and you're going to tell it to your mom. All right. Now, maybe it's not your mom. Maybe it's your dad. Maybe it's another family member. Maybe it's somebody, your neighbor across the street. But it needs to be somebody who doesn't really understand what you do. Right. And typically our moms really don't understand what we do, but I want you to have your brand story ready after a few steps here to be able to tell your mom and gauge whether or not she or whoever it is that you're going to tell goes, oh, yeah, that makes sense, right? Because that's the gauge. Someone who doesn't know you super well, they might know you super well, but doesn't understand your business, doesn't understand what you do very well. And maybe your mom's a great example for that. All right. So first you're going to have to write it. You have to rewrite it. Go grab that worksheet. It's going to help you work through all those steps that we've already outlined. You need to make it remarkable. Use all those tools. Use the founder story. Invert, the process, the beginning, middle, and end. Be covert about that stuff. Imply the problem. Imply your audience. Do all those things to make it really interesting and really remarkable. Okay. Apply creativity to it. Maybe rewrite it again and again. Do it a few times. All right. And then you need to try it out. And what I'm going to assign you is that over the course of 5 days, you need to talk to a stranger every single day and share with them your brand story. Get their feedback. What did they understand? What did they not understand? What was confusing? What was interesting? And then revise it and keep doing that over the course of those 5 days. And at the end, you'll be ready to just do it. All right. You'll be ready to put your story out into the world. Tell your mom, I want to hear how that goes. You can hit me up. Tell me how your mom responded to your brand story. And I'm going to ask you finally, will you resound your story? I hope that you make something, you create something that really you want to resound out into the world. That would be the goal. And I hope that you will resound your story. All right. That's it for the content. I have a few tools for everyone. You can grab the deck here. rsnd.co/cmvs. You can grab the worksheet, rsnd.co/brand-story. And again, this is just one part of your brand. So there's lots of other things you need to be working on. And I would say start with these 4, right? So work on your brand story and then work on vision, core values, personality. Those are all really important. If you need help with those, I am developing a course for that. I would say jump on my newsletter and you'll be first in line to get access to that course. It's coming out in spring 2021. And I'll definitely have a really nice steep discount for all my early adopters. Make sure it's really easy for everybody to grab that. So I encourage you, jump on there. There's good content that I put out every single month, regardless of whether you want to do the course or not. But hopefully it helps you with these different things. That course actually covers all 4 of these topics and helps you build your vision, your core values, your personality, and your brand story. That's the end goal of that course. And ultimately, you are remarkable. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. So let's quickly put the side-by-side back up. I'm going to grab that and let me see if I can quickly, okay, great. So firstly, I want to say thank you to Mike. And I think that one of the things that I really loved about this talk is that, Mike is, number one, very passionate about having a process, having a journey. And so, when you hear people talk about branding, one of the things I've noticed in other talks, it's very vague and there's not really what I would call a holistic or a sense of seeing it from different angles. And one thing I think that Mike's talk has really helped for the people in the conference and the summit, Content Marketing Virtual Summit, is to start to rewire your brain so that when you see brands around you, you start to think like, is this a brand? What is this brand? Is it funky? Is it relating? Is it actually espousing values? Is it helping to differentiate itself, for example, from an alternative? And I really like that historical context, and to know that there's an arc, right? So just a few other things to say thank you to Mike, and to wrap up, this incredible talk, is that when you're starting out as a company and you're a startup, a lot of people think startups will do branding later, but based on what Mike has shared, this is something that, both Mike and I really strongly encourage you to reconsider, and really realize that, it does take market research. It does take digging into your personality, what you want to represent, what your values are as a person and as a team and as a company. What's your mission? What do you want to be known for? And how do you want to be remarkable, right? How do you want to stand out from the crowd? And it isn't really something you want to put off until later. And it's really important. If you're a solopreneur or a coach, you also need to go through this. And if you're a bigger company, you have to go through this every quarter, every year. And we would save this for another talk, possibly having Mike back. But there's an idea that, that I think Mike and I could jam on, which is like the rise and fall of empires, through history. And there's also the rise and fall of brands, right? And brands drift from their true purpose. They start to,
They do.
Kind of let, they don't really work hard to stay in track with their mission and their service. So I think just leaving it here, this is like essentially even such a deep talk with so much.
There was a lot.
There's a lot of, well, I think that the thing that's really good about it is that, this is something that for the rest of your life, you have to think in terms of what you're going to be known for, right? So, it's definitely worth investing in. And I think that there's a history to it. And I think it's a holistic set of muscles. You don't go to the gym and just work out one muscle. You have a great, this muscle's good and the rest of your body's atrophied, right? So just say thank you to Mike for essentially, putting his heart into it, and really preparing and really sharing. And you can tell he lives it, right? He really loves it. He lives it. This is like kind of very important. So thanks so much, Mike, for being one of our featured speakers at the Content Marketing Virtual Summit, for providing links to your resources and all that. And we'll look forward to having you, come back, because we're going to be having more marketing summits coming up. We're going to have a whole schedule. Okay. All right, guys, that's it for this one. This is see you at the next talk coming up soon. And the days are packed. Put it on your calendar and let's keep rocking, and give us some feedback. What did you like most about Mike's talk? Are you going to do those 5 days of exercise? Take that action. Okay. I love that. All right, guys, see you in the next talk. It's coming up soon. All right. Make sure you're ready for the next one. See you soon. Thanks again, Mike.